finally got it going, I think.
Okay.
And we're
Good to go?
Yeah, you're my
All right, awesome.
Sit over here.
Thank you so much for your patience. You guys that are listening in and watching this later. This has been really patient people here, so we're awesome. Thankful for everyone's patience. So, so I've been doing some stuff here recently with regards to, and if you have any questions, maybe write them down, because oftentimes we'll get talking about stuff and then it's like, if it goes too long, if it's a short thing, fine, no problem. But it's just that oftentimes, we go into a longer thing. If we can leave that towards the end, that would be awesome. Anyway, so yeah, there's a bunch of pads and paper, pens inside of the cup there, if you need it. So I was going through the King's Oath, trying to understand the significance of it, as far as for us here in Canada, or at least on the land here in North America, but in particular under where we've created a corporation. It was set up that way. So Sessions 18, constitutional documents, which most people don't know exist. This is James Murray is actually the first Governor General of Canada. And it was set up as a corporation originally. But you have to understand what a corporation is. So, so of course, for me, I'll go and look up corpus juris, right? What's a corporation? So if I ask you, what's a corporation? Now you can say, anyone have an idea what a corporation is, what they think a corporation is? So we should, think it should be a pretty easy definition, right? But it's in law, the way that they have this thing set up, it's we're not taught law, so it's like we don't know, what the hell is going on purposely. They don't want us to, right? Because then we might figure it out and figure out that the whole thing is a scam. It really is, and we're going to learn that today. But Corpus Juris, book number 14, and in Corpus Juris Secundum, we have a couple different books in here of Corpus Juris Secundum on equity, and one of them, the equity is only 250 pages. In the other one, it's 800 and something. So it's same title, Corpus Juris Secundum. Page type, size, and everything else, same. So it's more than 3 times larger, though, in the second version. Or, no, the first version, sorry. The second version is the shorter one. And why? Well, there's reasons for it. One was a joint effort by some law society, which I'm sure is probably why there's 800 some odd pages. It's just to complicate things more. The other one is a shorter one, and it's actually pretty good if you want to get a good understanding, especially if you just start off with the maxims, which I suggest you do, because at the beginning, it goes into a lot of the theory behind equity, but it's a lot more precise and laid out better, I find, in the sections that start off with the maxims inside of section, I think it starts in 90, whatever here, maxims, section 93 is where maxims start. And so if you just start in section 93, and this one here, like I said, it's put together by West Publishing Company. So West Publishing Company one, this one here, is the shorter version. And the other one is West Publishing Company and some law society, which I think the whole purpose why it's got more, because this is more precise and it's like, anyway, I've looked at both of them a little bit and I thought, okay, this one looks to be a lot better, to be honest, from my opinion. So when they got rid of this law society, they redid it, and fixed it, in my opinion, right? It's like to make it simpler for people. Anyway. The corporation, here's what it says, is a collection of natural persons. That's a reference to men. Okay? And it goes on and says this, joined together by their voluntary action or by legal compulsion. So you know how it says equity will not aid a volunteer, right? If you feel like you have no choice, legal compulsion, is it really volunteering? And look what they've just done. So when they say voluntary action or, not and, or, isn't that almost feeling like you have no choice? Legal compulsion. If you don't sign this document, you can't take your baby out of the hospital. Isn't that what happened to you?
Yeah.
Right. So I would say that's legal compulsion. And if you're ignorant to how the whole game is played, isn't that fraud? 100%. Fraud is to take away someone's property through misleading them. 100%. Their whole system, it's fiction.
That was a threat of stealing property or child.
It's fixed because they claim because he went into the hospital, or his wife, with legal documentation showing that they've agreed to be under the corporation. Well, did they really agree? Were they volunteers, or was it legal compulsion? I suggest that almost everyone here, we've done what we had to do because we really didn't know we had any other choice. And if we really knew the truth of the matter, there's no freaking way we would volunteer to this bullshit. I'm just saying. That's my opinion. And you're going to understand why that's my opinion at the end of this whole thing. So, so we learned from Rourke, equity will not aid a volunteer. It's one of the maxims. That's true if you volunteered. And legal compulsion is not volunteering. And they make that clear here by saying, or legal compulsion. Okay. So then it goes on and says, by the authority of an act of the legislature, consisting either of a special charter or a general permissive statute, to accomplish some purpose, pecuniary, ideal, or governmental authorized by the charter or governing statute. Okay, so when you create a corporation, let's say we're going to get together. We're going to create a private members association. Okay? In order for it to do business with other corporations, we're going to have to create a corporation. Right? But we're the private members. Right? So we get together, we're going to have to create a charter first. What's our goal here? That's what the charter is. It's defining your purpose and what you're trying to do. Constitution, on the other hand, is the structure for which the business will be run. Okay? So you got two things, two different things. One created by men, both were actually created by men, but the second one to govern the fiction, because that's what it is. It's an idea it's fiction. In fact, we're just doing stuff, right? If we just stuck in fact, we wouldn't have all these problems. They don't want us. They want us living in this fiction. That's how they control us, through our ignorance. So they go and they create all kinds of systems to basically deceive us, and that's what they're doing. They're deceiving us through their system of law. And we're going to prove that beyond reasonable doubt by the time we're done this. It goes on and says, under a scheme of organization and by methods thereby prescribed or permitted. with the faculty of having a continuous succession during the period prescribed by the legislature for its existence. So in other words, the men get together, they're the legislature, and they create the charter, and we're creating the business now. And so basically, if one of us passes, the whole thing can live on its own, right? So that we can say, oh yeah. Well, why couldn't we just do this without all this bullshit? And we could. We don't need to freaking do all this shit. Only because they want to regulate, but we'll get into that in a bit. Anyways. I'm just saying, it's not a bad idea, right? The bad idea is that we're using fictional concepts to get rid of liability. Look, one of the things that should be very clear in every charter, because it's something that is that we're all, as men, obligated to our Creator under conscience, under good conscience. So if we just used equity instead of their system of law, which is based on men's precedents. Now, here's the thing. Something, I'm going to throw this out here and we're going to cover it later. When men make rules to govern men, or even themselves, we've taken away our obligation under our Creator, and we're claiming we have a right to do it ourselves. So, if your rights are unalienable, can you lien them yourself? Can you lien them? If they're unalienable, by definition, exactly. By definition, you cannot. Why? Because you're obligated to your Creator, and you don't have the right to govern yourself outside of your Creator. And that's where the fraud is here. And like I said, we're going to prove that. But that's the whole freaking system, and that's what they're trying to do. We're going to get down here a little bit more. I'll give you a little bit more on this to show you how devious these people are. Okay? 2015, you can look this up online. And maybe after this video, if this video happens to go out there, and that's not the intent, but if it happens to go out there and it gets published, which I'm not afraid of, and I'm not, trust me, I don't really care. We need to get this information out there. I don't care how this works. I'm putting it out there knowing that, you know what? I don't care, because what you people are doing is demonic. And I make no qualms about that, and I'm going to show that very clearly. What they're doing is wrong on every level towards mankind. Anyways, so what they're trying to do, 2015 in the United Kingdom, which they don't have a physical constitution. They have all these other laws that they basically use to govern themselves through those laws. And they call that their constitution, but it's not. It's just laws and rules by which they govern themselves, right? That are created by legislature. And what happened in England is that you had the king. And the king had, under conscience before God, swore oaths. And this is where, in the last 10 days or so, 2 weeks, I started looking at the king's oath and considering this whole thing, reading what it was saying, thinking, what really happened here and what exactly are these things? Because inside of here it says, are you willing to take the oath? The king replies, I'm willing. The king places his hand on the Bible, and the archbishop administers the oath. Will you solemnly promise and swear to govern the people of the United Kingdom and Great Britain and Northern Ireland, your other realms and territories, which Canada Corporation will fall under that, to any of them belonging or pertaining according to their respective laws and customs? Now, what does that mean? Your laws and the way that you perceive how you are to live before your Creator, you speak in your words. By your words you'll be justified, and by your words you'll be condemned. They're governing you, or supposed to govern you according to your laws. And we're going to get to that in a second, because this is the trick. So, your laws are not my laws. My thinking's not your thinking. What I express and I'm going to speak is going to be different than what you're going to express and speak. And these people, what they want you to do is do anything but what I'm about to tell you. Claim that your rights are unalienable, meaning I cannot even lien them myself. Why? Because God created me, and there's a maxim in law, that which one creates one owns. Only God has a right to rule me. And I am obligated to be led by the Spirit of God, if you will, and be compelled and learn and grow accordingly. And live to a good conscience under my Creator. That's the obligation of mankind. But if we change that and make men sovereign, sui juris, if you will, of one's own right, so that no longer does God exist, well, now we can use you because you're sovereign, and you better know your laws because we're going to hold you accountable. If we drag you into a court of law and that's your claim, not unalienable rights, because unalienable means you can't even lien them. God alone will judge me on judgment day. You can't judge me. I can't judge myself even. I just have to figure out how to obey my Creator. That's what I'm compelled to. My rights are unalienable under my Creator. I can't lien them myself even. And Jesus made this statement. Make no oath at all. For you can't change the color of your hair, etc. I say, okay, I'll meet you there in 5 minutes. Really? Really? In 2 minutes from now, I'm going to be dead. If I'm my own sui juris of my own right, well, I have to fulfill that. 5 minutes. I'm dead in 2. Really? You arrogant asshole. You arrogant asshole. And what did Satan want? Wanted to be like God. In the Bible, the very book that they swear on, they're using this. And if you're atheist or whatever, look, I tell people all the time, what you believe, you practice. If you really want to know your beliefs, look at how you live. That's what matters. Not what you intellectually believe. It's how you live. Your religion is what you live. It's not the intellectual garbage that you do, your gymnastics, and you fight over arrogance, ego. You know, it's the way we live. We treat each other. Love God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. The second part, if you're a devil, I can love you if I'm a devil too. Oh, this guy's so cool. Look at him. Look at how he's got these people deceived. I love this guy. It's not loving God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, though. It doesn't work without both parts. So I suggest that Jesus had the answers. Unfortunately, people don't follow the teachings of Jesus, and they think that they're going to be okay on Judgment Day. Now, this is an important verse. John 12, 48 and 49 tells us that the words that I shall speak, the same will judge us on the last day. It's John 12, 48 and verse 49 says this. For the Father gave me a commandment of what I should say and what I should speak. And verse 50 goes on and says, and his words are eternal life. So I suggest what we were supposed to be doing, because Jesus said in Matthew 28, very end before he left the earth, all power in heaven and earth has been given to me. Go make disciples, students of all nations. Look up the Greek words. Teaching them to observe all I've commanded you. That's what Christ wanted. For people to be disciples, practitioners. That's what a disciple is, of a master. The term Christ in Matthew, and this is very important in the sense of, they're used in the Bible. Right? So it's like, look, Jesus said, the words that I speak to you, they're spirit and they're life. And then, in the end, it's like, it's about the practice of his teachings. And if you're careful with his teachings, you'll see it. Over and over. Where I go, my sheep will follow. What's a sheep? One that follows in the steps of a shepherd. And it's like, this isn't a Bible study here. This is study on law. But their laws are actually based under the king in the Bible. And so it's like, and inside the Magna Carta, it makes a statement. They say there's only 4 sections still in effect in the Magna Carta. I've seen somewhere else said 3. I think they made a mistake. I think it's 4. I got that off of the UK government website, that there is 4. Part of Section 1, and the part that is in Section 1, I'll read it. And actually, we have the original Magna Carta here. And my friend Eagle Eye will tell you that that they actually, while they make amendments to laws, in their system, really, they don't change. But, again, the trick is to get you to use their laws, right? Because what is that? Another man's rules, not God's. So as long as you're using their laws, you default under a system of law that's not God's. And so therefore, you can lean your rights in that system. But watch what the Magna Carta says. So I'm going to read from this one first, because the other one I'll have to go searching for as I'm talking. But in this one, it says, "First, we have granted to God, and by this our present charter have confirmed for us and our heirs forever, that the Church of England shall be free." Now watch this, because now they're going to use the word liberty. So they're 2 different words. The word free is different than liberty. And they say, "shall be free and shall have all her rights and liberties inviolable."
Inviolable?
Inviolable. Inviolable, and it means without
violation.
Without violation. Yeah, very good. So in other words, you can't violate their rights, the Church of England. Well, who is the Church of England? When was this written? Actually, this says here, this one, the way that this one reads, right? The Church of England. The way that this one reads, from 1215, this is the 1297 one, right? And some of its interpretation is probably written the same way, it's just that somebody wrote it differently, right? But here's what this one says. And this is some of the changes that went on, right? They took some of it out. And this is some of the stuff that they took out. Now, let me just go on and read the rest of this. It says, "We have granted also and have given to the freemen." Now, that's different. Okay, so there's some stuff missing here, important stuff we're going to get into, because we see that the inviolable is the last part inside of the 1297 one. But watch the difference. These people are really sneaky. In the original one, it says, "First, we have granted to God, and by this present charter have confirmed for us and our heirs in perpetuity, that the English Church shall be free." Well, notice how one says the English Church and the other one the Church of England. Well, the Protestant Revolution, anyone know the date? Anywhere close even? Century? 1500s, right? Like early 1500s, in the teens, 1508, 15, whatever it was, right? Martin Luther pinned his thing on his thesis on the church door, right? And spread throughout Europe, basically, to get rid of the Vatican. They, for some reason, didn't like these people. Wonder why. anyways, so they while they were doing stuff, you can actually find out if you go do some research on it, and I suggest you do. It's an interesting read. And so this is like, what I do is like I'm trailing things back, trying to figure out all the little details of how this stuff really works. What's the premise behind all this stuff? So anyways, so Martin Luther in like I said, it was 15 something. So this is written in 1215 and then in 1297, right? And so we see that the Church of England, as opposed to the English Church, which actually would be clearer, because first of all, there was the Catholic Church, and then there was the men, and Jesus says, "Go tell it to the church," and that's the first time we hear that word, really, as far as It comes from a word that means to be called out. And what did Christ do? He called people to come out of the government system of the world and live according to his teachings, which he said are the teachings of God. And that's up for debate. That's fine. You may not share that opinion. That's fine. I'm just sharing with you the facts as I know to be true. And you may have a different opinion. And we'll all stand before our Creator on that last day, and we'll find out what was right at that point. Some people will say, well, there's no God and there won't be nothing there except for, we'll find out. So anyways, it goes on. It says, the English church, so the church, it can't be the Church of England. That didn't happen until the 1500s. So this is talking about the men and women. Shall be free under the church. Now, what church? Well, Christ is the head of the church. Right? So if Christ is the head of the church, it's those that follow Christ. And like I said, there's different ideas on this, and people have different things, as far as how this all looks and stuff. But I'll get to you as we're going through this. You'll understand why I believe that the way that I'm expressing this is actually right, because it fits together, in my opinion. So it says, shall be free and have her rights undiminished and her liberties unimpaired. That we wish this to be observed, and this is what was taken out, that we wish this to be observed appears from the fact that of our own free will before the outbreak of the present dispute between us and our barons, who had said that some people would like to say the Magna Carta is not in effect because it was done under the sword. So you can't contract under the sword. Okay. And so, can't contract under the sword, but you can rule people okay under the sword, right? I'm just saying, right? It's like, look, I suggest the Declaration of Independence got it right. Governments rule at the consent of the governed. The problem is that it's wrong, because it tries to take away people from being under the government of God, as if they have a right to rule each other. And I suggest that it's a trick. It's a trick. If you're able to lean your own rights because you're sui juris of your own right, I can do what I want. If that's true, well, no room for God in that picture. That's the trick. And remove God. Now we can get you to trick you into using words that you don't know how their system works. Their system of law based on presumptions of facts, trying to turn presumptions into reality. We'll get more into that in a bit. So you don't know how that works, and now they're tricking you because you better know how it works. You're going to go into their jurisdictional courts if they drag you in by force under threat of gun duress, and then try and use your words against you, and you don't know how to express things in a way that, then they're going to say, well, this is what he asked for. This is what he said. This was his words. He was sui juris, and he made this claim, so therefore, that was his will. Trickery. All trickery. That's the game. Anyway, so it goes on. We grant and confirm by charter the freedom of the church's election, a right reckoned to be of the greatest necessity importance to it, and cause this to be confirmed by Pope Innocent III. This freedom shall be observed. None of this is inside of the second one. This freedom shall be observed of ourselves, observed ourselves, and desired to be observed in good faith by our heirs in perpetuity. Whole ton of that was taken out of the second one, or this is actually the third one, really. It's not in there. So, just saying, they've changed it, right? And you can see how important stuff inside of the first one that they've removed, right? Because they want to, whatever. It's like, they said, well, I don't want to live by that, or I don't want that to be expressed because I don't want the people to understand that, right? So we'll just give them the second one. It's like, of course, we have to follow the first one because, that's actually where the law was set, as far as for them, right? Because they, it's like, and then eventually what they do is, in 1688, Anyone familiar with that date? What happened then? 1688. So 1688 is when England became a constitutional monarchy. So the reason it's a constitutional monarchy is because the Parliament, men and women, basically took over, and then they offered to the outgoing king, which took off, fled for his life. Again, you go read it all, find out the history of it. His cousins, or whatever it was, offered them to be a constitutional monarchy, meaning that they'll be there just for the show. But the Parliament will be the ones that will make the rules, not the king. And so the Parliament will act, well, I don't know who they're acting on behalf of, but those men are the ones that are making the laws over other men. And so that's what happened. So ultimately now, instead of oath under God, it's oath under a king that's under their rules. Think about that for a second. The Constitution or the rules of the king are under the governing body's rules. God is gone from the picture. Except men are still under God, in fact. Right? All deception. This is all deception. That's what their whole system of law is. It's based on presumptions and certain technical realities. And so those men make the laws, not God. But that's what 1 Samuel chapter 8. Any idea what's in there? Anyone? 1 Samuel chapter 8 verse 7 in particular, but it's worth to read the whole thing. Verse 7 says, by asking for a king, the children of Israel have rejected me that I should not reign over them. Now a man will rule you instead of God. They've rejected God. So as long as a man is ruling over a man, and I suggest really as long as you think that you have the right to rule yourself, it serves their purpose just the same. And remember, who's behind this? And it's not a he, it's an energy, if you will. We can be drawn into love or a dark energy. And as long as we're willing to do unfathomable things against conscience, then I suggest that we're the problem. And that what Christ came to do is actually to show us how to fix ourselves so that we don't do that. But that's something that we all have to come to. You can't force it on you. Christ never forced it on his followers. You know, at one point he says, no one can come to me unless the Father draws them. This is in the book of John. And a bunch of people started leaving. He turns to the apostles, and this is what he says. Will you leave also? And then Peter turns to him and says, where are we going to go? You have the words of life. But what did he just do? He said, these guys are going. You guys want to go too? That's basically what he said. He didn't try and force them.
That was after he started talking about drink my blood, eat my body, and that's why they got offended and left.
Yeah. Well, but I'm just saying though, then he made that statement.
Right.
So he made...
Chase him away.
Well, yeah, so anyway, it's interesting in the sense that, you know, and this is my point, right? And this is some of the differences, which we'll get into as we go along, because this is all important to this whole thing, right? With what happened to the church and where it went wrong, because they don't follow Jesus, right? They don't practice his teachings. They'll even tell you that, oh, that's not possible, that's not true, and they will fight you. I've talked to church people, and I was one of them. I was the same way. And I spent years trying to figure out how to fix myself and how this all works. And that was my first thing. And then I got into this law stuff. And now I realize afterwards how they both mesh together. And without the both of them, if I didn't have that religious journey first, if you will, where I was trying to say, how am I supposed to get right with God? How? And I spent my life trying to figure this out. You have no idea. You can imagine, but you have no idea. And so anyways, now I get into this law stuff and this religious stuff. It's like, now I can see my path being completed. Because if we're going to fix this, man, if we're going to fix this problem, we're going to have to understand the problem. If we don't understand the problem, we're destined to repeat it over and over and over and over indefinitely. And I suggest that, like Jesus said, if any man will do his will, he'll know of my doctrines, if they're of God or I'm speaking of myself. It's just theory until you practice it. Till you actually put it to practice, the teachings of Christ, you'll always have a problem with them. Because you're not willing to do them. God, change my heart. Change me. Love my enemies. I don't have the love I should towards that man. My emotions are bad towards that man. That's proof that my heart's not right. Change me, God. Yes, they need work. Okay, we all do. I can only deal with myself, though. Right? So this thing goes on now. So that's the Magna Carta. And the King's Oath, going back to the King's Oath, the Archbishop says, so first of all, he agrees to govern them according to their own respective laws and customs. The king replies, I solemnly promise so to do. And actually I watched, by the way, the king swearing the oath, the man acting as king. I watched him swearing the oath. And this was taken, the sheet that I'm actually looking at, from the Toronto Star. And so I printed it off. And I looked and watched every word, and it's exactly. So this is what happened. From what, that's my testimony, because I watched. Unless they go and they change it, or as my friend Dennis might say, Mandela effect. Anyways, so we could use that for anything, but we can't prove Mandela effect at all. But anyways, the whole point being, so he promises so to do, and then the Archbishop says, will you, to your power, cause law and justice in mercy to be executed in all your judgments? And the king replies, I will. And the king kneels at the chair of estate. Well, that's an interesting thing. Why is the king kneeling now? Who do you kneel before? Some people will kneel before a king, and you see it in the Bible, looking for mercy, right? And people do the same thing with our Creator. They get on their hands and knees and they pray. Kneels at the chair of estate, and the Archbishop says, will you to the utmost of your power. So now he's making a solemn oath before God. Well, the whole thing is the coronation oath. It's all a solemn act. But this is where it's like he's on his hands and knees. Will you, to the utmost of your power, maintain the laws of God and the true profession of the gospel? Well, that's interesting. Why put the true profession of the gospel? We can get into that some other time. But will you, to the utmost of your power, maintain in the United Kingdom the Protestant Reformed religion established by law? What law? What law? Well, the king's word is law. And so I suggest you'd have to go back to the 1500s. And you'll find there that there was a king, George III, I think it was, that wanted to divorce his wife. And the Pope wouldn't allow it. And so he broke off from the Catholic Church, right? And the Protestant Reformation was already underway thanks to Martin Luther. And so it's like, yep, and the people were all buying into Martin Luther stuff. And so they basically had revolutionized the way that the religion was taking place as far as how it happened. Off of the Catholic Church, which would like to tell you that the popes are a succession from Peter. Misunderstanding. We can get into that later on. Maybe we'll see how this goes. Anyway, so then that's the law it's referencing here. And he says, will you maintain and preserve inviolably the settlement of the Church of England and the doctrine, worship, discipline, and government thereof? What's the government of the church? What's the term Christ? Matthew chapter 2. Where is he that's born King of the Jews? The wise men are coming. We've seen his star and we've come to worship him. Herod and all of Judea or Jerusalem is troubled by this statement. And Herod demands of the chief priests and of the scribes to know where the Christ is to be born. Now they're looking for the King of the Jews. Synonymously, he uses the term Christ. And they respond with regards to this term Christ. The governor that will rule God's people will come out of Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written, out of Bethlehem of Judea will come a governor that will rule my people. So the term Christ, they're looking for the King of the Jews, synonymously the term Christ, and without a beat, they didn't skip it at all, the governor that will rule God's people. In regards to that term Christ, and a lot of people are like, there's many anointed things. Listen, this is written after Christ left the earth by one of his followers, and they clearly understood that term to mean one thing and one thing only. They weren't looking for the next anointed priest or any of the other offices that were anointed. They were looking for the king. And they understood that term Christ in that way alone. And yet that word is used almost the exact same amount as the word Lord in reference to Christ. 800 and some odd times roughly in the Bible. Why is that important? Because today, what is a king? It's someone that rules you. Jesus said, the words that I speak, the same will judge mankind on the last day. If you're not walking in the teachings of Christ, are you his follower? Is this what the church is teaching today? No. And Jesus said, my gospel will go to the ends of the world, and then will the end come. It's been Paul's gospel that's gone to the end of the world, not Jesus's, and there's a difference. That Bible was put together in the 4th century, meaning that in Nicaea, Constantine brought together the bishops of the Roman Empire. In 70 AD, the temple was destroyed. And the followers of Christ, which were Jewish originally, had to flee or were killed because of an uprising that took place that got the temple to be destroyed. And so the religion of Christ, in the practice of Christ's teachings, basically went into underground. And all that was left was Paul's Gentiles, because they didn't have to hide. And so in the 4th century, when this was all brought to a head, where the bishops are called together, why would they bring them together? I suggest because of Romans 13, which is basically telling you something that's contrary to 1 Samuel chapter 8 and a number of Jesus' other teachings, including where Satan offered Jesus the governments of the world and said, if you bow down and worship me, I'll give you rule over all of the kingdoms of the world, for they've been given to me and I can give them to whoever I will. And well, that makes sense when you understand that men ruling men by force, God said they've rejected me. Well, then who's ruling over them if it's not God? But Romans 13 says God is. Romans 13, I suggest, clearly contradicts the other scriptures. Now, just because we brought this up and people are going to maybe watch this and whatever, or you guys have to work through this on yourself, let me just make this point. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 15. Paul tells Timothy, this thou knowest, that all those of Asia have turned away or aside from me. All of Asia. Asia in the Roman Empire is a small little place in Turkey. It's a small, like this table is a pretty big table. It's a small little area like this on the whole empire of the Roman Empire. It's small. And yet Revelations is written to the 7 churches of Asia. Why is that significant? Because Paul was considered himself the apostle to the Gentiles. And John writes to the only churches that forsake Paul that we know of out of his followers. And he writes to those same churches of Asia, that small little dot in the Roman Empire. And what he tells them is this, the very first church, the church of Ephesus. Ephesians 2, 8, and 9, you're saved by grace through faith, not by works. James comes along and says, don't you know that faith without works is dead? That your faith is proven by your works? So how can you say you're saved by grace through faith? Theoretically, that may be true if you want to nitpick about things, but don't discount works and the importance of them. Because Christ says on Judgment Day, Matthew 25, he tells you that the governments or the kingdoms of the world, all the men and women, the sheep and the goats are going to be brought before him. And he's going to put the sheep on his right and the goats on the left. And to the sheep he says, when I was hungry, thirsty, sick, and in prison, you took care of me. And the goats, when I was hungry, thirsty, sick, and in prison, did you practice the teachings of Christ? Loving your neighbor as yourself. What if that was you? And we're all just living for ourselves, and we're sui juris of our own right, and we can do what the hell we want, and there's no God. And then you wonder why we're in a godless society. I'm just saying. Sorry. But going back to Revelations, the very first church, chapter 2, verse 2, first one to the church of Ephesus. Chapter 2, verse 2. In chapter 2, verse 2. You tried those that claimed they were apostles and found them to be liars. All of Asia turned away from Paul. Paul, the self-proclaimed apostle, and the only other person that called him an apostle was Luke, that wrote the book of Luke and the book of Acts, according to history. Why is that important? Because he's a Gentile. Why is that important? Because Paul claims to be the apostle. He was most likely a convert of Paul, and he was very familiar with Paul, calling himself an apostle, and he does the same thing. Calls him an apostle. And so in Revelations, at the end of the book, it says that the foundation of the New Jerusalem, I believe it's in chapter 21, the foundation of the New Jerusalem is founded upon the 12 apostles of the Lamb. Well, isn't that interesting? Not 13. 12. I suggest clearly excluding Paul. Anyways, so James 2:10, very important. All of this is very important to understanding all of this. Says that if you break the least of the commandments, you're guilty of all. Numbers chapter 15, verse 30, roughly, says that if you sin presumptuously, before that, it goes on for 5 times in 3 verses. If you sin through ignorance, but if you sin presumptuously, you're cut off and there's no way back in. And so if you've done it ignorantly, you didn't know, then you can go and say, I didn't know, I made a mistake, God forgive me, make a sacrifice, and you're okay. That's how the covenant worked, right? But if you knowingly sin, you were done. There was no way back in. I'm telling you, you were done, period. And people don't understand this. They looked forward to the new covenant and they prophesied about it over and over and over again. And Moses said, and I think it's Deuteronomy chapter 20, he says that God will send another prophet like unto my son, or myself, and whoever doesn't hear that prophet will be destroyed. And so I believe without a doubt in my mind, my heart, that that's Christ. And so the old covenant demanded perfection. And the new covenant says there's a way back. And Ezekiel 18 says if a man turns from all of his sins that he's committed and does that which is right, all of his sins will not be mentioned against him, and in his righteousness he will live, because he turned from his sins. Christ calls men to repent, to turn from their ways to follow his. He says, look, my ways are the way. If you want to fix your relationships amongst yourselves, this is the way. You don't have to believe it. It doesn't matter. I mean, we're all, in the sense, it's like we can live how we want. God will judge us. But it doesn't matter, though. And to me, this is important because I suggest there's a lot of people that have done some heinous things. They could be judges. They could be world leaders. Heinous, evil things against conscience and against God. And if we don't forgive those people, We're not to judge them. Now, there's two different kinds of judgment. There's something to say that that's wrong. That we're supposed to do. Jesus called the Pharisees hypocrites. We can call something black if it's black, but we're not supposed to execute judgment. Let you who's without sin cast the first stone. We're not supposed to execute judgment. That's the kind of judgment that we're not supposed to do. Punish people because God created them. God will deal with them. Well, what happens if they kill me? Well, you can be a follower of Christ or you can go your own way. I suggest if we're not willing to practice the teachings of Christ, this is just my take on it, we're going to continue this cycle. And those people are going to live in fear. And they'll never turn from their sins. Why? Because they're afraid. They're afraid of what will happen to them if they were to be outed by man. And so for them, it's like we have to go harder into this thing. And we all know about Epstein Island. A lot of people will tell you that it was a plant by the CIA to get dirt on people. They put them into these compromising situations so that they would never turn and go a different path, and they could control them this way. But what if we, us, you, me, and all the rest of mankind said, you know what? No, God will judge them, and if I don't have God's forgiveness, there's no hope for me. And so I'm not willing to judge them. I'm not willing to. And I suggest that's the only way forward, in my opinion. And they've got all the technology anyway, if they wanted to. But I suggest that, like I said, ultimately, we have to lay down our guns, and they have to lay down theirs. But we can't control theirs. We can't control that. What if they don't? You want to live in that fear? Go ahead. Christ died, and for me, if I have clean hands on Judgment Day, I'm good. That's my take, right? But, like I said, most people don't believe in the teachings of Christ. They claim to be Christians. They're not Christians. These religious people are hypocrites. And now here's where it comes down to. Again, this hierarchy structure, Jesus said, it shall not be so amongst you. He said that the princes of the Gentiles rule over each other. It will not be so. He says you can't serve two masters, Jesus. This hierarchy structure is what's demonic. Paul taught it. And he didn't realize what he was doing. Look, the devil's a deceiver. I don't blame Paul. Right? That's not the point here. The point is that we have to fix ourselves. And if we break the least of Christ's teachings, we're guilty of all. So shouldn't that be our focus? His teachings? Shouldn't that be what if we're going to be his followers? If we're not, if we're just going to be hypocrites, there's the door, right? In the sense of you don't have to claim to be a follower, but don't fool yourself. If you're not actually practicing his teachings, you're not his follower, you're a liar. And Gandhi said, it's you Christians I don't like. You're so unlike your Christ. And he also said, if the Christians actually practice the teachings of Christ, all of India, and I suggest all the world, would be followers of Christ. That's what Gandhi said. If you Christians actually practiced his teachings, Gandhi got it. Unfortunately, the still church, in my opinion, just my opinion, God changed me, changed my heart. That's what we're supposed to be doing. Help me, I can't do it. On my own, I can't do it. Jesus said, with man it's impossible. With God, all things are possible. It's about changing your heart. How do you know the state of your heart? Look at your emotions. If your emotions are bad, your heart's bad. It's bad emotions that cause us to do bad. This may sound like it's long-winded. You may have heard some of this before. It's like, but I don't know where this is going. And so I'm kind of speaking this because people need to hear this. This is important. So going back to the king's, his oath here. So Christ is the head of the church. So he says, will you maintain and preserve inviolably, without violation, the settlement of the church, the people of England, and the doctrine, worship, and discipline, and government thereof, under Christ? So in other words, will you not allow Christ to rule his own people? Rule them according to their laws and customs. And if it's under Christ, the church shall be free. That's the Magna Carta. Right? And then it goes on and says, as by law established in England. Now this is actually referring to the Magna Carta. That's the law of the Magna Carta it's referring to here. And will you preserve unto the bishops and clergy of England, you have to look up these words and understand them, and to the churches there committed to their charge, as such rights and privileges as by law do or shall appertain to them or any of them. So, and to the churches. Well, the churches is me and you, and I suggest a bishop is an overseer, somebody that's like a mentor. Right? We're only in one Christ, not to follow. Bishops have no right to rule a man. That's not the way Christ's teachings is. It's not this hierarchy structure. He said, "Oh, you are brother. You have one master, one Lord, one Christ, period. All of you are brothers." That's what Christ wants, in my opinion. The king replies, "All this I promise to do," and the king places his hand on the Bible and says, "These things I have here before promised and shall perform and keep, so help me God." The king kisses the Bible, and the archbishop says, "Your Majesty, are you willing to make, subscribe, and declare the statutory accession declaration oath?" And the king replies, "I am willing. I, Charles, do solemnly and sincerely in the presence of God profess," and Jesus says that every word that a man speaks will be given account for on Judgment Day, "testify and declare that I am a faithful Protestant, and that I will, according to the true intention of the enactments which secure the Protestant succession to the throne, uphold and maintain the said enactments to the best of my powers according to law." The king signs copies of the oath present by Lord Chamberlain. It's an interesting thing that comes next, because that's the oath, and now there's a prayer. And the king kneels before the altar and says, "God of compassion and mercy, whose Son was sent not to be served, but to serve, give grace that I may find in thy service perfect freedom, and in thy freedom knowledge of thy truth. Grant that I may be a blessing to all thy children, and of every faith and belief, that together we may discover the ways of gentleness and be led in the paths of peace through Jesus Christ our Lord." So he makes some claims, and again, he'll stand before God, and maybe we believe them, maybe we don't. And let's say they're false for a second. And this is important because a lot of people believe they are false. But let's say they're false. Let's say he's not a faithful follower of Christ, because but that's not what he actually said. He said, "I'm a faithful Protestant," right? What does that mean? Well, the thing is, though, is this. If you break the least of the commandments, James 2:10, you're guilty of all. So if you're not following Jesus' teachings faithfully, all of them. So Jesus says, it won't be so amongst you. So you're not supposed to be a king. So in ignorance, at this point, maybe he's just ignorantly made a profession that he should never have made, because it's contrary to the teachings of Christ and to the Old Testament scriptures too. 1 Samuel 1:8, by asking for a king, they've rejected me. You claim you be a faithful Protestant, so why the heck are you doing this? And Satan is the one that rules over all the governments of the world. So you've been deceived. But isn't that what it's all about? Isn't that why we're in this problem to begin with? Because we're all being deceived. And we're going to get into that here. And this is what's going on. So Jason and I, we filed a document into the court. And actually, it wasn't into the court. It was public. In the sense of, well, it's not public, it's private, but it's like, it was not put in a sealed envelope to be opened in private, right? Because you can play a game in law and say that a snake is a bunny rabbit, and a bunny rabbit is a snake, because we presume, and it's gone unrebutted, but it still doesn't change what it is. You're still a man under God. Whether or not you have some system of law to hide behind, you're only deceiving yourself. So Jason and I, we worked on this document because he had a simple speeding ticket, really. And So you might think that this is a little bit of overkill for a simple speeding ticket. But, here's what we got.
We'll cheat into it.
So, top we have the date. The man or woman acting as administrator, justice, judge in this matter. The Judicature Act of Alberta states, in all matters in which there is any conflict or variance between the rules of equity and the rules of common law, with reference to the same matter, the rules of equity shall prevail. Now, equity is equity jurisprudence. Everyone in this room knows this, but for the sake of the video, there's a bunch of maxims that go along with this, and it's based on the principles of conscience, good conscience before God. And like I said, those maxims are basically principles by which we are supposed to be in honor towards each other and care about each other. Because the first maxim is equity will not suffer a wrong to be without a remedy. The second one is equity acts upon the person. And so the person that's committing the offense, the idea is that we try and get that person to turn from his wrongdoing. It's not about trying to gain some financial reward. It's about trying to change things for the sake of the good of mankind, so that we stop doing the wrongs we're doing. And I suggest if we only had equity jurisprudence and not this corrupt system of law, we wouldn't have the problems we're facing on this earth. And we need to forsake at all cost this corrupt system of law and live by an equitable system and rethink what we're doing. Anyway, we go on here. So, furthermore, equity prevails. Furthermore, it is stated that equity will not aid a volunteer. We covered that in this thing earlier. But be it known that duress is not volunteering when one does not know their options and is compelled through their ignorance. Thus, it must not be construed to be voluntary when one feels compelled due to ignorance. In the same way, presumption is not fact but fraud when one is not fully cognitive of how the presumptuous legal system works. So fraud is to deceive a person through their ignorance, to take advantage of them financially or in some other way that's not in their interest. And so I suggest it's clearly fraud, their whole system. That's why they call it color of law and they call it a fiction. It's not real. It's all fraud because it tries to defraud God of his right to rule man. But anyway, this thing goes on and it says, when one is not fully cognizant of how the presumption of law system works, an unrebutted presumption does not become a fact in reality, but rather remains an unrebutted presumption. But when a system of law turns something it is not into something, that system is equivalent to witchcraft and not law. So in their system, they tell you that you have to rebut all the presumptions. Well, before we started working on this legal bullshit, how many of you guys knew that you had to rebut presumptions inside of a court, or it became a fact in their system? An unrebutted presumption is still an unrebutted presumption, and that's all it is. It's not a fact in reality. They're committing fraud. Their whole system is a lying, deceptive system, totally brought here by Satan himself in the hearts of men that are trying to control mankind through their ignorance. Goes on, it says, I revoke any presumption of consent to be ruled by another and any perceived benefit from fraudulent presumption contracts, which means all of them, right? And so then it goes on, it says, this matter brought before the court conflicts between God's and man's and God's laws. Whoops. We went a little bit too far. Okay.
One more. So it's
Up a little bit more? Okay. Is that right?
no.
Up a little more?
Right there.
This matter brought before the court conflicts between man's and God's laws and is thus properly a matter of both de facto and de jure law. De facto meaning, in fact, they're doing what they're doing. De jure mean of proper authority, right? Only God has a right to rule man. Your rights are unalienable under God. Only God has a right to rule man. You don't even have a right to contradict those things. Well, Judgment Day, we'll find out. But I suggest you don't. And it goes on, it says, as a man, I require a full equitable hearing under both God and conscience to be administered in this matter. As Charles, the acting King of England, during his coronation ceremony, solemnly made an oath and a promise to govern the people according to their respective laws and customs, and as Jesus stated, every word a man shall speak, he shall give an account for on Judgment Day, according to Matthew chapter 12, verse 36. So that's where you find that. As a man, my rights can only be seen under God, unless those bringing this matter before the court are trying to deny God his sovereign right to rule over me, using satanic practices instead. And so, what did Satan want us to do? Become like God, rule ourselves. Right? Come out from God's rule. And that's the problem. That's what they're trying to get us to do. Claim your sui juris of your own right. Yeah. So that they can trick you because you don't understand how their law system works. Now you said, you're sui juris, you're of your own right, and therefore you better know their law system. Because if they drag you in there by hook and crook under God, even if you've done your paperwork, you think they're going to honor that at some point? At some point, if we don't change all this, they will try and use force. They're not going to, these people are evil, and we see that by what they're doing. They're evil. So, as a man, I require full equitable hearing. Did we deal with this already? Okay. There is a maxim in law which states, that which one creates one owns. Seeing all men are created by God, and only God has a right to rule man, as is declared in 1 Samuel chapter 8. Jesus also states one cannot serve two masters. Matthew 6:24. As well, Jesus told Satan, when offered rule over all the governments or kingdoms of the world by him, thou shalt worship the Lord your God, and him only shalt thou serve. Matthew 4:10. All subjection of man's rule of other men by force, agreed to or not, is a violation of God's right to rule over man, and is contrary to man's conscience. If I took one of you guys and put you inside of a place right now, a room, and locked you in there, would that be right? Would it be okay? They're doing it, right? And if I did it, you would do whatever you had to do to get yourself the hell out of there and gone. Whatever you had to do. We know it's wrong. Innately, we know that this is wrong. There's no excuse. And while we can use some demonic system of government to justify our actions, we have none before God. We must forsake their system. If you're a judge listening to this or a police officer, quit your freaking job. Immediately hand in your resignation. That's how this comes to an end. When we all say we're not going to do it no more. I can't force you. You'll stand before God one day. Quit your job. Stop it. Force them to do it themselves. And if they kill us all, well, so be it. There'll only be them left. It'll be a lonely world. And it'll be a freaking evil world. And it'll be dog eat dog then. Anyways. Jesus stated, judge and you shall be judged, in the book of Matthew, chapter 7, verse 2. I'm just moving the screen down here. Yeah, thanks. So, James 2:10 states, if you break the least of the commandments, you're guilty of all. Jesus stated in John chapter 12, verse 48 and 49, my word shall judge mankind on the last day. As the Father gave Jesus a commandment of what he should say and speak, and so we see that to violate Jesus' teachings is to break all the commandments of God, because if you break the least of the commandments, you are guilty of all. And thus any judgment against anyone, and that's the act of doing harm, throwing the first stone. That's the kind of judgment we're talking about. Not judging something as right or wrong. Of course, you're supposed to do that. Otherwise, you have to cut your head off. And thus any judgment against me or any other man in your fraudulent courts of justice. They're not courts of justice. Courts of law. They're courts of their law. That's what they don't tell you. Not God's law at all. And that's clear by the fact that they make their rules to rule over you. It has nothing to do with God. It's satanic. But anyways, will place you in danger. Of course, this is obviously the people that are working for the courts and anyone that is willing to use force against another man, of the judgment of God. Jesus stated in the book of John, chapter 9, verse 41, if you were blind, you should have no sin. If you're ignorant, of course, you don't know. But now you say, we see, therefore your sin remains. Now that this letter clearly defines the satanic practices of your courts, you cannot any longer claim ignorance. I implore you to repent and turn from your sins and seek the mercy of God. This is what we filed into the court, by the way. They're going to be seeing this. And I pray to God, under good conscience, that whoever gets their hands on this quits and passes it on to the next person, and that the next person also quits. That's how you bring this down. Where am I here? And seek the mercy of God, as expressed through Ezekiel chapter 18. The whole chapter actually is based on, a discussion, of what people were saying about God and how his rules were. It's actually a really good chapter. It goes on and says, God is merciful to those who humble themselves and pray and turn from their wicked ways, as written in 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 14. God, equity, and good conscience require the resignation of all involved in fraud in order to fully rectify it. I realize that means equity can only properly be fulfilled by dissolving the fictional corporations masquerading as government and rethinking the way we live on this land. But this is necessary to fix the injustices being caused by men that have sold their souls for $1, by those whom are deceived and are being deceived to believe they can somehow be happy by power and materialism against the teachings of Christ. Be warned, you can't serve God and mammon. Mammon's materialism. It's not Satan. Seeking physical things. Someone scratches your car and you're willing to kill a human being over paint on your car because I'm laboring so hard for my paint. Instead of loving each other and caring about each other. That's not important. Problems are priorities got to change. Instead of living by his words, which are the words of life, Matthew 6:24 and John 6:63 are the references. As a court of grace, chancery, equity, the king's conscience, they're all synonymous as far as historically what the courts of equity are supposed to be, is to administer equity. And equity tended to restore both victim and offender to wholeness before God, and will thus forgive mistake upon repentance, turning. The courts demand you to turn from your wrong if you're committing wrong from someone, if you're brought into a court of equity. And if you don't listen, they find out why you didn't, and then they warn you again to go and fix it. And if you still don't listen, this is how their system works. Then they put you into prison or whatever to try and basically, and they'll figure out the affairs and they'll go and work on it and fix it all. And they'll rectify it all. And like I said, ultimately it's like we have to rethink things. That's all this is really about, is trying to say we need to rethink this. We need to get rid of this damnable system from hell and create a system under God, where conscience is under God. Because otherwise, if we're sui juris, God help us all. If there's no God, God help us all. So where are we? Close to here somewhere?
Yep.
Yeah, right there. Restore victim and offender to wholeness before God.
And will thus forgive mistake upon repentance. So God is willing to forgive man's mistakes upon man turning from all, and this is referenced over and over in those scriptures, from all of his sins. You say, well, I got a lot of sins. Well, God's gracious and he's merciful and he can help you. Get on your hands and knees. The Bible says that God resists the proud, give grace to the humble. Humble yourself. God, change me, change my heart. I need your help. And God can do it. And it might be a process. It might take a little while. But you know what? Together we can do it a lot quicker. If the church actually became the Church of Jesus Christ and actually stopped all this hierarchy structure and just followed Christ and we work together towards this end, it's amazing what men can do together. Amazing what we've done in a short time with technology. Last 20 years. Incredible. Like, think about it. Incredible. Imagine if we took that same energy and we did that with spiritual matters to try and rectify this. What we could do in no time. Especially since we have clarity on some of this. I say we have. I hope that I'm giving clarity on this. And that this is a good foundation for going forward as far as to fixing this problem. I believe that's what we're doing here, to be honest. I believe that that's what we are called in this room right now to do. I believe that's what we're here for. Anyways, as is declared in the book of Ezekiel chapter 18, seeing I have no choice but to interact with the corporate government until it gets dissolved and its subsidiaries, I claim the private right to usufruct over the government-issued documents and property until a complete equitable provision be provided. As long as the demonic system is in place, there is no doing justice and not by halves. That's one of the equitable principles. It seeks to do justice and not by halves. As long as this demonic system exists, they'll be allowing this evil system to go on. We've got to see it changed. We have to. Under good conscience, we must see this come to an end. As fraud voids all contracts, and I will add now, in both law and equity, fraud voids all contracts. I require a trustee under God and good conscience capable of providing complete equitable remedy in this matter. I require to be contacted within 7 days with a provisional solution providing equitable remedy to prevent future offenses against me, which is one of the principles of equity. And these principles of equity, again, they're just that, they're principles. I'm supposed to treat you as myself, love you as myself. So if I see you're being harmed and done injustice to, it's my obligation to fix that. Right? We have to fix this. And so that's the obligation we have. And I suggest that by the grace of God, I really believe this. We're about to see this world change for the better. As all men are obligated to be trustees under God for each other's well-being, I entrust the officers of this court with this sacred responsibility in satisfying this trust. Written by, well, authored by somebody different than who it was written by. But this was written by the man sitting at the end of that table there. Grantor and beneficiary of this trust and witnessed by God. So, I mean, we've gone on long enough. I think that hopefully this has given perspective to what the real problem is. And we can continue to play their games by allowing their systems to work and doing private trusts and the rest of this garbage, which would just validate their system. I suggest that's not an equitable solution for mankind. That the only equitable solution is to call governments of the world, which we are doing here today. By the grace of God, this video is going to go out there and hopefully change this world.
Did you say call the governments?
The men, we're calling them to change.
Call them. Oh, okay.
Right? Those that are trying to.
Calling means get rid of, kill, like calling animals. So
No,
you're calling the governments like that's
Dennis, I know you like to be funny, but that's not the place for it right now.
That's what you said. Calling.
Right? No, we're calling them. Call CALL.
But you are saying we want to call the government.
We want them to change, and it's a figure of speech, right?
Sure.
We all do it, and so we're saying that look, this has got to stop. What they're doing is wrong, and we've just exposed it. Hopefully, hopefully this has made it very clear what's going on here. It's very wrong, and why we're in this position today, where men are willing to give people needles that are causing them harm, and all kinds of other things. And we have all the evidence. And they try and suppress it because they say they have a right to. Because men have agreed through their fraudulent system, which voids that right. They're wrong. They don't have that right. They never did. It was always wrong. And the only way that we got here is through deception. These people are using, and I suggest they're under a demonic spell. That's the truth of the matter in this whole thing. They're deceived, being deceived by Satan. And that's the thing with deception. We've all been deceived. And there's an old saying, but for the grace of God, there go I. We need to live by love. But we need to abandon this and not be willing to continue on with these people's agendas, which, like I said, really isn't even belong to these people. It's the spiritual energy of a demonic principle, power over them, that's causing them to go down this path. Okay, I think we're going to end it here, unless you guys want to have anything to say or whatever. I hope this has made it clear for everyone. I hope what the real problem is here. I've had a number of people that have heard me talk a little bit about this, and they said, okay, I'm convinced, but will they really be convinced? And I suggest that we all have the same conscience. It's just some of us have seared it. But like I said, turn this stuff against them, and they'll fight hook and crook, right? Because they know it's wrong. They know it's wrong. We've got to stop it. It's wrong. We've got to stop it. Amen?
I got a question.
Sure.
You said earlier, 1776, the Americans got it right, the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
Do you think they also got a right and defended themselves physically against England?
You already know my opinion on that, right? Like I said, I only believe there's one solution to stop this. And that is if we stop trying to justify doing harm to other people and feel that we have a right to do so. This will never end as long as we take that position. In my opinion, when Christ went up on that cross, and when he was, after being brutally beaten from what we hear of the whole thing, he prayed, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. He lived what he practiced, what he preached. And I suggest, like Gandhi said, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. We'll continue on down that path if we go down there. This will never end.
Right.
That's my take on it.
But when I unleashed, biblical example, one angel killed 185,000 Assyrian soldiers.
Listen, God has a right to rule man.
Right.
God alone.
But God can send an angel and do the killing.
If God wants to do that, but let me just say this. If you think you're going to be that messenger, right, I suggest that Christ taught against it. Like I said, we will never...
Legions of angels, and my Father would send them.
Sure, but he also said, love your enemies. And so he didn't. And the whole question then would be, would he then go against his teachings as a man under God? Because, would he go against his teachings to actually then use those angels? He never did it, first of all. But I suggest that he could have taken himself down off that cross if he wanted to, but he came for that purpose.
At that time. How do you know this time things are different?
Again, if you want to continue the cycle of destruction, hold on to your thoughts. Believe them if you want. But you'll never get to the place of peace, not with God, I suggest, down that path. You will be in war, and trust me, they got better guns than you. And they will use them against you, and they deserve to use them against you if you're going to be... I'm not saying it's right, but I'm saying that if you're evil and they're evil, guess what? You both deserve to die.
I'm not talking physical.
Well, but I'm saying, though, that if that's... Because, like I said, we can make mental gymnastics all day long here. Right? It's like, ultimately, it's like, look, isn't this fighting?
Right.
In the sense, aren't we calling them to come? Didn't Christ fight in the sense of to actually preach to his message and then to die? So it was a spiritual battle. Yeah, okay. But like I said, for all intent and purposes, like I said, we can confuse this and make this harder than it needs to be. The simple thing is do not use physical violence against another man. You don't have the right. You didn't create them. Right. And if you think that you have the right, like I said, this is never going to end.
It's not me doing physical harm, or would it have been Christ to do physical harm to call 12 legions of angels and let them do what they do?
Look, you're hypothesizing. You can go to infinity on hypotheses.
I'm suggesting we're talking about how this whole system for thousands of years is based on the Bible, and the controllers of the world understand these spiritual...
No, they don't understand. They're under Satan's deception. They don't understand this stuff. If they understood this stuff, do you think that a man wants innately? Aren't we all looking for happiness? Answer that question.
Sure.
Okay, if we're all looking for happiness, and I suggest it's true, and John Fortescue with King Henry was it Henry? I think it was King Henry VIII, before he became king, he mentioned that we're all seeking happiness. And if that's true, and I believe it is true, because that's how we're made in the image of God, we all want to be loved, and we want good emotions, not bad. And so if we're doing stuff that's sabotaging our own end, is that really what we're seeking? I suggest that oftentimes people do harmful things because they've been harmed. Hurt people hurt, like that psychology thing, right? And so these people are doing things that are out of some type of unfortunate incident in their past. They feel somehow victory over their victims from way back then emotionally, and they're struggling through that emotion today, and they've done it for the rest of their life oftentimes. And that people are basically dealing with the emotional scars oftentimes, and that's what causes them to do terrible things to themselves and others. And if we don't learn to have empathy for each other and to love each other and trying to figure our way out of this, we don't fix this. That's my take.
Thanks, guys.
All right.
Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, take care, Gina. Yeah.
What would you,
Peter?
yeah,
I hope this really gives some clarity. Like, I think it's clear. I've talked to a number of people about this, and this is the first time that some of you guys have heard this, as far as the, like, and there's going to be things here that probably is new to most of you anyways. And hopefully, I'm hopeful. I really am. We've got to change this world.
Well, the only way to do it, you're right, is inequity.
Yeah.
And until the courts are in court of equity, they're still gonna be under the court of dollars, not law. So it's equity, and that's all there is to it. It's the only way it'll change. So,
On our hands and knees.
yeah.
On our hands and knees. God, change us first. And love your enemies. Have affection for them. God, help that man change. I don't know why he's that way. Help me have empathy for him. Help me understand why he's this way. Help him to change, God. Work on his heart. Get on our hands and knees. That, to me, is the only way we're going to change this. And there's power in prayer.
Thanks. See you this week sometime.
Okay.
Thanks for coming out.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much.
That's good. I'll lock the front door.
you think we'd be here having this cordial conversation if the Americans hadn't physically fought back in 1776?
You know, again, it's hypothetical. Problem is that ultimately God is sovereign. If God wanted to, he could have sent an angel to sit down with a number of people and laid out his plan. But this is his plan, in the sense of we're here today by divine guidance. And though, what we should be doing, hopefully, I believe, without a doubt, Jesus said, when I return, will I find faith on the earth? He shows that the world is going to be desperate of faith, in the sense of before God. But then he also says that he delays his coming for the harvest. There's supposed to be a great revival, and hopefully by the grace of God, and maybe by the grace of God. Just like that revival inside of, what was the name of that place in Kentucky?
Yeah.
What was the name of that?
Asbury.
The Ashbury revival. Just like that preaching there started that revival by the grace of God. Maybe this brings about a change in the whole world and brings Jesus' message to the whole world. And maybe we see the end come really quick here. Maybe that's what we're here for. Only time will tell. But I believe that we're going to see a revival, and it's coming real quick. And we're about to see things change in this world. I really believe that. If God has put all these things into me to share with mankind, I mean, this is a unique message, you have to admit. One that you're probably not going to hear anywhere else. Why allow it to come out right now? Why?
I needed to hear this tonight, Peter. I'm dealing with some family issues that, irk me to no end. But this gives me a complete new perspective in how to handle it now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a connection between spirituality and law, right?
Absolutely there is. God created us. He created this earth.
Spiritual-LAW-ity, I call it. Spiritual-LAW-ity.
Yeah.
Combined law and spirituality, so.
Truth issues, governance issues, lots of complex issues, right?
I gotta go.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thanks for, yeah, this is, like I said, I needed this.
So is this one for public consumption? Put it on a website, put it on my Substack, whatever,
Yeah, I think I made that clear already.
alright?
Everyone can.
You bet. You bet.
Yeah,
See you.
take care.
See ya. Down this-
Yep, you bet.